Today we're going to do an oil change on this 2008 6.4 Ford Super Duty. A few things I want to cover. I try to think of the different questions, or I look at on different YouTube videos and see the questions that people are asking and try to make sure I cover them and see if I can actually offer you guys any help here. So one of the questions I see that's pretty often is the viscosity or the weight of the oil. The most common by far is 1540, and that's pretty much adequate unless you live in the really cold climates, say the Northeast or Alaska or something like that, to where you feel you may be needing it. Then the owner's manual will tell you which one, but usually it's either the 1540 or the 530. I'm in the desert Southwest, and by far all we ever use is the 1540. Now, some of the things you want to look for: this is the oil cap off of it. It's the Automotive Petroleum Institute, the API, the rating, the CJ4. C is the first letter is going to be the way the fuel in the engine is ignited. If you have a diesel, it's going to be C because it's compression ignition. If you have a gasoline, such as this one's a gasoline, you see the API, it actually has a S rating. So it's a spark ignition. So just make sure you get this again is their ratings. So you have to get the C because it's compression ignition for the diesel. And then the J is the minimum. And just think of it as, you can cross them numerically, as in A being 1 and so on until you get to J. So you want to be J or higher. Anything higher is good because it's a better oil, and nothing underneath it because it doesn't meet the standards that they have for these engines. A few things I want to go over and try to cover, and I'm not going to ever lie to you guys or try to tell you, oh, you got to use Ford, because again, if we don't have trust, I'm not doing you any good. I do, of course, recommend Fords because they're definitely built to a better standard, but there's other ones out there that can even be superior to Ford. I just can't tell you which ones are or not. If you always get the genuine, you know you don't have a problem. It doesn't matter what car I'm running. If I'm running them in the Audi, I get the genuine Volkswagen Audi ones. If I'm doing the Ford, I'm using the Ford. I just can't go wrong that way. Now, one of the reasons why this is real important, and I'm starting to see this daily, I'm even getting no starts because of oil filters. It may sound stupid, but we're seeing them. What happens is people are using the standard length oil filters, but they have the Napa Gold or CarQuest, AutoZone. I'm seeing these larger oil filters, so they have a larger cap to accommodate the larger oil filter. And then what you have is, once you get a standard oil filter in there, because you may not know, or you don't change your own oil, or maybe it's the first time you did it and the previous person had it wrong and you just continue to do it wrong. So it's a never-ending cycle. But it's really important to have the right length oil filter and the right size cap to keep it. The reason is the oil filter on these engines, or pretty much any engine that has the oil filter on top, you don't want that oil to always be draining back and going in the crankcase. And your first startup, your initial startup, it has to build all the oil pressure up before it gets to go through the oil filter and everything. You have no lubrication, and on the 6.0 and the 7.3, you can't do that just because you need oil pressure to run the injectors. So any engine that has the oil filter mounted on top will have some sort of device, whether it be a plunger built inside the oil filter, or valve, or something to do to keep the oil up inside the housing. So when you have too short of an oil filter inside of there with a large lid, that oil filter is just floating. So two things: you're not getting the filtration because it's not flowing through all of the filter, and you're also not getting the oil filter housing is not maintaining the oil or keeping it up there, so you can have a loss of pressure. So always make sure you get at least the right length of filter, the right filtration as far as the microns, the amount that it filters, and the right size cap so it retains it, keeps it in the right place, keeps it down so you have a good solid fit there. Now, as far as sockets that I use, this is just your basic, your least expensive one. You can buy them on eBay, just a 36mm socket. A lot of guys use this. If you're just going to do one, that works. Another one, if you do quite a few, or you have the 6.0, I recommend this one. The reason being, you have the 36 on one side, and on the other side you have the 24, so it can do your fuel filters, your upper fuel filter on the 6.0. On the 6.4, 36 does both. But on the 6.0, you can use this on one side. It has just the 3/8 adapter there. We can go either way. And then when you're doing the fuel filter, you flip it over. It does both. This is available through Snap-on, but it's a pretty handy tool to have around. And the other one, which I'll be using on this one's made by Matco. At least that's the one where I bought it from, was Matco here. This one's, it's a 36 millimeter. It's kind of hard to see in there, but this is a 36 millimeter to fit on there, and I'll show you using it in a second. But these grooves here are for the 7.3 fuel filter. So if you're working on a lot of these Powerstrokes, this one's pretty handy to have too, because you're doing the 36 millimeter for your oil filter, fuel filter, and you're also doing the 7.3 fuel filter cap with this socket. So this one's pretty trick to have too, and they're not that expensive. I think it was like 16 bucks or something. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the oil filter, and also on these, always remove the oil filter first, because like what I was saying, you have roughly, I'm going to say a quart, even though it's not quite a quart, of oil up inside this housing trapped. So you don't want to go below, start off, drain your oil, then get up and do your oil filter, because you've just put another quart. As soon as you undo your oil filter, you just let loose of a quart of oil filter, of dirty oil, to go back in there, instantly starting to contaminate your oil system. So always, very first thing as you're changing your oil on these engines, on any engine that you have an upper filter on it, is to take your oil filter off first, so all your oil can drain down into the crankcase, and then you can get out as much as the oil as you can by getting the filter out first. So let's go ahead and remove this oil filter. Okay, so we're going to do the oil filter. On the 6.4, you have two caps that look very similar. The more of the square one is your fuel filter. It's also the higher one, and the one closest to your degas bottle. So ignore this one right now, because it's, again, it's your fuel filter. Pretend I didn't even talk about it. So we're going to go ahead and go after the oil filter and get it off. It's the, again, it's the rounded one, and it's the one that's just center line pretty much of the engine. So let's take your oil filter off. Now we'll loosen it up. Now hopefully, this is also a good test you can do for a crank nose start on a 6.0. When you pull it out like this, we have a bunch of oil around it and it's draining. As you see, as I raise it, it's still draining. So that's a good sign. That tells me that we have the right size oil filter in there, the right cap, and the housing was full of oil. And you want to see that. If you get in there and you found that it was dry, you have an issue going on, whether it's your oil filter, the cap, or there's a valve on the bottom that when the filter's in all the way and down tight, it pushes the drain valve down, so it forces all the oil to go through the filter. So let's go ahead and change the filter. We're going to change it, put on the new one. Do this first again. We have the filter out. I went ahead and pulled it out, discarded of the filter, and you know, just look inside there. You shouldn't have any debris or any contamination there. No need to go start doing all the extra cleaning, wasting more resources to clean it all out, because hopefully you don't have any contamination in there. But notice the location of your O-ring, because I have seen it where people put them on the lower one. It goes inside here. So go ahead and just pull your O-ring off. Always change your O-ring. We'll get them in. I mean, we see quite a few cars, obviously, but I'll get in at least once a month where somebody came in and they don't change the O-ring, and they come in with an oil leak, and it's something as simple as it's not the O-ring. So you know, just change it. It came with a kit. Just change it. So just go ahead and just stretch it on. I try not to roll it. I'm actually pulling it. So I just work it around. That way I didn't roll it if there is a seam on there, which there shouldn't be. But if you don't roll it, you have less of a chance for a leak. And also what I'm doing here, I'm just using some of the old oil for lubrication, because you don't want to put a seal on dry. You put it on dry, you're going to be hating it next time you change it. So now I have the new seal in the proper place. Just take the new oil filter, stick it inside there. You can hear it snap, and it also becomes pretty sturdy. So it's inside of there. That's also another good sign. If you have it to where you can't get the oil filter up inside of there, it's usually because you have the wrong cap. Using the aftermarket caps, they don't have a way to accommodate these retaining snaps here. So that's another thing too. If you can't get it in there, or you find a problem, it could be the lids broke off the old oil filter, or you have the wrong cap. You have other issues. So I'm just trying to give you things to look for, because these are different problems that I see during the day. So we have the new oil filter, the new cap in here. I mean the new seal on the cap. I'm going to go ahead and install it on the truck. Then I'm going to drain the oil, then add the new oil. Okay, we're going to go ahead and install the oil filter now. Take a look at your standpipe here. Make sure it's not cracked. The spring, everything's going good. Every now and then we'll see one of those broke. So another thing you want to do is when you put your filter on, there should be a spring action to it, like this. That tells you, again, I know I keep stressing this, but you won't believe how often we see it. The right size oil filter. So now we have it. We have the spring action, so I'm going to go ahead and start it. And it has the torque specs here on the cap, but it's written in Newton meters. Me being an older American here, it's both this, the fuel filter, and all the other ones. They go to 18, 20 foot-pounds. So, if you're anal, go ahead and use your torque wrench. Other than that, don't break it. It's not a tow hitch or a lug nut. Just snug it up, and then just, it's good. We'll check it for leaks. So I'm going to go ahead and go down below, drain the oil, and then add new oil to this one. A couple things I want to go over here. Again, this being a 6.4, and I discussed it on a previous video about how the 6.4 can get a bunch of fuel contamination in the oil and cause your oil level to rise, or actually accumulate more oil, however you want to look at it. Is make sure your pan's able to accept 18 to 20 quarts, maybe even more. But what I want to do on this one, I'm going to go ahead and check the oil and make sure, because I don't want to overfill this pan and end up having to have a bunch of a stain here on the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and check the oil. Take it out and wipe it first. Okay, this one is overfilled. It's not real bad, but we're overfilled by a couple of quarts for sure. So being a roughly 15 quart system, we want to make sure that we have something that's going to take 16, 17, 18 quarts. So that's just something I want to tell you, so you don't have any regrets changing it, thinking you had a good 15 quart pan down there, and then next thing you know your driveway's full of it. So especially if it's a 6.4, or only if it's a 6.4, because of the way the system they have with the regen. Make sure your oil is not overfilled to start with, past the capacity if you can. So let's go ahead and go underneath and change the oil, or drain the oil. Okay, underneath here, if you have the original drain plug on these, pretty much all of them are 3/4 or 19 millimeter, same thing. You can switch at 3/4 and 19 millimeter. You just have your drain plug here. Of course, obviously, don't be doing this. Watch out if it's hot. Watch out for hot oil. When you pull your drain plug out, pull it towards you so the first cascade of oil does not go into your face. And again, make sure your pan's able to accept up to 18 quarts of oil. Got the drain plug in, got the roughly 15 quarts of new oil in there. Now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and got the new oil filter and everything in there, of course, we already showed that. I'm going to go in the truck, start it. We're going to look around the cap, make sure there's not any leaks, which there shouldn't be, but it's always good to make sure before we drive off. And then let it run till the oil pressure gauge comes up, and then shut it off. Let it sit for a second, check the oil level, make sure everything's right. Even though it should be, because we did it, it's always a good habit to get in. That way if you get interrupted in between doing an oil change and end up having to forget that you added the oil or something. I mean, I've never done that, of course, but you might want to make sure it's a good habit to get into. So I'm going to go ahead and start it, check for leaks, then check the oil level. Take a few minutes for all the oil to go and settle back down, and of course you got to be on a level surface. If you're sitting on your driveway and you're like this, take all that in consideration when you're checking your oil on these things. So we'll go ahead and let it sit for a second, do the let the oil return back down to the pan, check the oil level, make sure we're right, and go out and drive it.